Welcome to the Deep Dive. We sift through stacks of sources, articles, reviews, notes, so you get the key insights without the legwork.
And today, we're diving into a show that's really stirred things up online.
Yeah, seriously. Some sources called it spectacularly stupid, and one, well, let's just say they weren't subtle, calling it the worst Marvel product ever.
Quite the claim, isn't it? We're talking about Disney's Ironheart series, specifically the first 3 episodes.
And our sources for this one. A pile of YouTube reviews, mostly highly critical ones.
Definitely. It gives a, let's say, unique and often pretty blistering take on why it's become so controversial.
Absolutely. As we went through them, some really striking points came up, things you might not expect. So our mission for you today is to unpack these criticisms.
Yeah, look at the character interpretations causing the friction and, understand the bigger picture, the industry stuff that made this show such a flashpoint, according to these reviews.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so the absolute core of the criticism, it seems, is Riri Williams herself.
The protagonist.
Right. And the descriptions are pretty harsh. Sources call her an abomination of a person, even a psychopath.
Wow.
Some argue she's actually a more sinister character than the villain of her own story. It's strong stuff.
And didn't one reviewer just flat out say she's the worst?
Yep. The worst, most unlikable character in the MCU's history. That's the quote.
Okay, so she's meant to be a hero. What exactly are these sources saying makes her so unlikable? Especially, like, her motivations.
Well, a big thing they flag is her opening monologue. She calls herself the greatest inventor.
Okay, confident start.
But then immediately complains she can't make anything really big without billions of dollars.
Oh.
And critics jump on that, not just because it sounds entitled, but because it completely ignores the whole,
Tony Stark built this in a cave with a box of scraps.
Exactly, that meme. It's like the show doesn't get the core appeal that genius can overcome limitations. That's sort of the point of Iron Man, right?
Right. It undermines the very legacy she's supposed to inherit.
Yeah.
And this theme, this lack of humility or self-awareness, it keeps coming up.
Oh, yeah. The reviews repeatedly mention her complete lack of humility.
For instance.
Like, apparently shitting on Tony Stark, who she's supposed to be succeeding, and also shitting on the headmaster at her school.
Not exactly endearing.
No. And the reviewers argue that her belief that you have to be rich to succeed, that she needs the billions first, is just presented as fact in the show.
Not as, like, a character flaw she needs to grow past.
Oh, apparently not, or at least not effectively in these early episodes. It's just there,
right.
Unchallenged.
And when you compare that to other MCU heroes?
It stands out, yeah. I think Peter Parker, super smart, probably smarter than his teachers, right?
Sure.
But he respected them, revered his mentors. Riri, as shown here, according to these sources, is just a completely different, almost jarring approach.
And it goes beyond just her attitude, right? The sources mention specific actions.
Definitely. She gets expelled from MIT. Selling completed assignments, plagiarism for cash.
Not great.
And then apparently she just steals the prototype suit, an Iron Man ripoff suit from the school on her way out.
Wow. Okay, so theft on top of academic fraud.
Right, which, leads directly into questions about her morality. The reviews talk about how quickly she agrees to join a criminal gang.
Despite saying she doesn't want to hurt anyone?
Exactly. That line gets quoted, followed immediately by her joining a crew involved in theft, extortion, breaking, and entering. The actions just don't line up with the words, even her own words.
And are there specific incidents the reviews point to?
Yes, a couple really stand out in the critiques. Her being there when a police officer gets shot, not killed, but shot.
Okay.
And then a really disturbing one, apparently deciding to leave a character who's subdued to die by suffocation.
While she saves herself.
While prioritizing her own escape, yeah. Some sources even connect this to her comic book history, where they claim she's portrayed as a known murderer, known cop killer.
And they feel the show is echoing that.
Yeah. They feel the show's actions and her lack of seeming remorse lean into that darker interpretation, yeah.
So that leads to the big question from these critics.
Is she a hero at all? Or is this basically a villain origin story?
An anti-hero, maybe? Or just bad?
Well, reviewers are debating that. Is it intended as an anti-hero arc, or did the execution just make her seem like a villain? Many argue it's the latter.
And there's that AI companion, right? Natalie?
Yeah, the AI replica of her dead best friend, supposedly Riri's conscience. But the critics say this conscience does not push back enough. Riri keeps doing questionable, even criminal things, and the AI is apparently not much of a moral counterweight.
So her ambiguity isn't really explored, it's just presented.
That seems to be the consensus from these sources, yeah.
Okay, so beyond Riri herself, what about the show overall? The narrative, the production. Sounds like the character issues were maybe just the start.
That's definitely the impression. Reviewers were pretty rough on the execution. A common complaint was that it felt incredibly padded, like 25 minutes of content stretched across an hour and a half. They used words like boring, but also punctuated by moments of purest cringe.
Cringe, okay. And unintentionally hilarious.
That too, yeah. Which points towards deeper issues.
The writing, presumably.
Exactly. Critics talked about shaky, unsure, unconfident scripts. The feeling was that the scripts just don't believe in their heroes.
How so?
Instead of showing Riri's genius through, clever actions or dialogue, they just have characters saying Riri is a genius over and over.
The old tell, don't show problem.
Classic problem, yeah. And it extends to other areas. Awkward dialogue was mentioned. Like characters constantly complimenting each other for how attractive they are. Just odd dialogue choices.
And technical issues, too.
Yeah, even things like visible mouth non-sync. Little things that just add to a feeling of maybe a lack of polish or care.
What about the rest of the cast? Her crew?
Yes, her criminal crew. Sources highlighted that it includes a token non-binary character and a lesbian powerlifting couple.
Okay. And the criticism was?
That they felt like one-dimensional DEI cardboard cutouts.
Yeah.
Basically stereotypes rather than fully developed characters.
So representation that felt forced or superficial to these reviewers.
That seems to be the argument, yeah. That it undermined the potential for a strong ensemble cast.
And any other characters draw criticism?
Ezekiel Stane got mentioned quite a bit, Obadiah Stane's son.
From the comics, right?
Yeah.
Supposed to be formidable.
Yeah, but apparently in the show, he's portrayed as really ineffectual. An ineffectual male.
Really? How so?
Well, the detail that seemed to baffle reviewers was this side plot involving dog poop, just described as sad and totally irrelevant.
Dog poop. Okay. That's unexpected.
It certainly left those reviewers scratching their heads about the point of his character in this version.
So looking at the plot itself, Riri joins this gang led by the Hood. Things escalate.
Big time. They move on to a second heist, much more serious. And during this one, the Hood actually kills an uncooperative CEO.
So Riri is now directly involved in a crew committing murder.
Yep, which pushes her deeper into that criminal world.
And then there's a big reveal connected to the Hood.
Yes, this really got the critics talking. It's revealed the Hood is in league with Mephisto.
Mephisto. The Mephisto that Marvel fans have been expecting for years in other projects.
The very same. And reviewers were just baffled. Why here? Why in Ironheart?
After all the buildup in shows like WandaVision where he never appeared.
Exactly. It felt to them either really out of place for this specific story or like a desperate attempt to suddenly inject some, big Marvel lore into a struggling show.
Interesting choice. So tying some of these threads together, what did the sources say about the show's overall message, if any?
Well, there was quite a bit of sarcasm on this point. One source noted that for a show supposed to be empowering for Black youth, the main character seems to choose crime instead of the right path at every given opportunity.
So a massive contradiction in their eyes.
A huge one. They found it deeply problematic from a storytelling perspective, especially given the supposed intent.
Okay, let's pull back a bit. How does this all fit into the bigger picture? The MCU, Disney, the industry reaction. Because this show had a weird journey to release, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. A very troubled one, according to these sources. Announced way back in December 2020.
Filming wrapped when? Late 2022.
It's November 2022, yeah. But then, nothing. It was apparently delayed for 2.5 years.
2.5 years, why?
The reports cited by reviewers claim there were almost a dozen attempts to re-edit it.
A dozen re-edits. That sounds extensive.
It does. And there was even a rumor mentioned in these reviews that Kevin Feige himself watched it and basically knew he fed up.
Oof. Strong words, even if it's just a rumor.
And the release strategy seemed to support the idea that Disney wasn't confident. Very little marketing, apparently.
And they just dumped the episodes quickly.
Yeah, 6 episodes over 2 weeks. The reviewers saw that as a sign Disney wanted to get this over with as soon as possible.
Despite a pretty hefty price tag.
Exactly. Estimated between $100 and $150 million. A huge investment to seemingly just, dump.
So how did the audience react initially? Or even before release?
The trailer got absolutely hammered online, ratioed into oblivion, as they say.
Right.
And there was review bombing happening on sites like IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes before anyone had even technically seen the show.
Okay, but when the actual negative reviews started rolling in from people who had seen it, what was the online discourse like?
Well, predictably, accusations started flying. The claim was that any negativity was just because the show had a black female lead.
And therefore rooted in racism.
That was the argument being made online, yeah.
But the critics we looked at, they had a counter to that.
They did. They pointed back to Riri Williams' history in the comics.
Just-
Apparently quite notorious and volatile. Some comic readers, according to these sources, already saw her as a narcissistic psychopath. And they also pointed out that her solo comic series had previously failed.
So their argument is that the show didn't create the problem. It just highlighted or even worsened existing issues with the character herself.
That's the counter-argument, yeah. That the criticism wasn't solely about her identity in the show, but about long-standing problems with this specific character's portrayal that the show failed to fix or even made worse.
And how did these sources see Ironheart fitting into the, let's say, recent trajectory of Marvel and Disney projects?
Not favorably. Critics are saying a lot of recent releases feel more like homework than entertainment.
We've heard that sentiment before.
It seems to be growing, yeah. And despite Bob Iger publicly saying Disney needs to focus on quality over quantity,
The perception from these sources,
the perception is the exact opposite has happened. One reviewer colorfully called it a steady sewage stream of slop.
wow. Okay, so the final verdict from these particular critics on Ironheart.
Pretty unanimous and pretty damning among this group. Ironheart is by far the worst live-action Marvel ever made that they have seen.
Okay, so let's wrap this deep dive up. What we've really uncovered from these sources is this central kind of bizarre paradox, right?
Yeah, exactly. A show that's seemingly meant to launch a new hero.
But the execution, the character choices, the story, it ends up portraying someone so unlikable, so morally gray or even dark.
That these critics overwhelmingly see her not as a hero, but as a villain, or at least deeply problematic.
So final thought for you, the listener, to chew on based on all this.
Yeah, maybe consider this. When you're adapting characters, especially ones who already have a tricky or volatile history in the source material, how do those adaptation choices affect the whole franchise, the brand, the audience trust?
And maybe also, what's the storyteller's responsibility? Do you need to directly address flaws that audiences see in a character? Or can you just present them, especially when, hundreds of millions of dollars are on the line?
Definitely something to think about.